Right, good afternoon everybody, and welcome to the Corporate Policy Development and Scrutiny Panel today, Monday the 28th of November, and we have started promptly at 4 o'clock. So can I please welcome everybody to the meeting. Our councillors on the panel are spread over throughout the this chamber. We'll just have to introduce yourselves when you speak, please, and ask questions. I think everybody knows everybody, but it would be nice to do that for anybody who's watching us. Can I please ask for the emergency evacuation procedure? Thank you.
When the continuous alarm bell sounds, you must evacuate the building by one of the designated exits and proceed to the named assembly point. The designated exits are signposted. Arrangements are in place for the safe evacuation of disabled people.
Thank you very much. Right, so we move on to item 3, apologies for absence and substitutions. We have apologies for Councillor Firth, and the substitute is Councillor Hansel, so welcome and thank you very much for that. Item 4, declarations of interest. May I ask the panel if they have any declarations of interest? No? Right, so we move on to item 5, urgent business agreed by the Chair. There is no urgent business today. Item number 6, public and councillor statements, and I'd like to invite Councillor Karen Walker to make a 3-minute statement. Thank you very much, Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Chair. Will Peace Down St John be included? Dear panel members, each year we see millions of pounds being spent on numerous projects across the local authority, all of which are carried out with the desire to invest in our communities and to improve the quality of life for our residents. We are grateful that the Council uses a budget setting and discussion process that allows all councillors to contribute and make representations on behalf of the constituents. It's this very reason that we are submitting this statement and these items for consideration in the 23-24 Council budget. Each week we spend our time out in the community knocking on doors, meeting residents and finding out what their desires are and aspirations for Peace Down St John. This is their wish list for the forthcoming council budget. 50,000 for Carlingcott resurfacing, 20,000 for hedge maintenance and path clearance in Peace Down St John, 25,000 to replace outdated play equipment in Peace Down St John. We'd also like the council to consider reintroducing the Ward Councillors Empowerment Fund, £59,000 spread across the local authority, £1,000 per member. We will make a real difference to supporting grassroots projects in our communities. Please do consider these financial requests from Peace Down St John residents. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Walker, and Councillor Samuel, the Cabinet Member, is here, so he will obviously see your statement as well as have heard it. So thank you very much. I'll move on now to item number 7, which is the minutes for the previous 2 meetings. We held over one set of minutes due to some clarification that we required. So we have, I'll take them separately. September the 26th, is everybody happy with those? May I have a proposer, please? Thank you very much, Councillor Singleton, and a seconder, please. Councillor Dogood. And may I see the panel's approval? Councillor Hodge? Oh, right, thank you. That's unanimous. Thank you. 11th of July, those were the held over minutes that we discussed last meeting. Can I defer to Councillor Dogood? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we've had a bit of toing and froing during the last few months, but I'm personally satisfied that the Chief Executive of AQUIS did answer those questions due to an unfortunate situation where Speaker wasn't on, and that's given clarity. So I'm quite happy to recommend that those revised minutes are now approved by this committee.
That's great. Thank you very much. Will you propose those then?
I certainly will.
Thank you. May I have a seconder? Councillor Davis, please. And everybody in favour? Again, that's except Councillor Singleton. Do you want to abstain?
Well, no, I wasn't present.
Oh, that's fine, yes. That's all right then. Thank you. Yes, so that's approved. Thank you very much. Item number 8, may I invite Councillor Samuel to give an update, and it's nice to see you back.
Thank you, Chair. So this will be fairly brief because I've only been back doing council duties since mid-October, so that's not that long ago. The first thing to say is, and maybe Michaela can make a note of this, Councillor Roper is now responsible for economic development. The leader has split the portfolio that I previously held. Councillor Roper has taken that on from the beginning of September, so you should probably invite him to give you the economic development update because I won't be able to. However, and just to be brief on this, the main thing I want to cover, I mean, in the 6 weeks or so since I've been back working in the council, is actually on your agenda, which is the presentation, receipt and agreement to the medium-term financial strategy, which we've got on the agenda, and the preparation of the budget. And I think it'll become clear when Andy and I go through that at item 10, that everything that I would have said normally is going to be said then. So if you're happy with that, Chair, we'll wait until that item comes up.
Yes, that's perfect. Thank you very much. Does anybody want to ask any questions? It may be a little bit premature, but no? Well, shall we wait for the item then, which is now coming up? So item number 9, economic development update. And can I invite Simon Martin to talk us through your presentation? I don't think the whole lot because we've seen the slides already. The floor is yours, sir.
That's better. Sorry about that. Quick update to provide oversight on all of the economic and regeneration activities the Council's undertaking. Just by way of service organisation, this all now forms part of the Director of Sustainable Communities under Sophie Broadfield, and it's organised together in my service area where business and skills, regeneration and enterprise zone team all work together to deliver a series of economic development, business and skills interventions supporting our business communities and our residents into more kind of better routes into employment, work and creating a more resilient sort of economy for Bath and North East Somerset. There's 3 areas of team work that we're very much predominantly involved in. One is the business and skills team, which I will hand over to Claire, just a very quick oversight on core services, and some of the, probably the thing we'll focus in on is just some of the outcomes that have been achieved through our work streams that support residents and businesses. Claire?
Hi, so I'm Claire Lynch, Business and Skills Manager. Thank you. So our core function is to deliver sustainable and inclusive growth to residents and businesses within the region. If I move on to the key current achievements. So whenever we're looking at programmes and projects to deliver services in the region, we always have that as our underlying theme. Throughout the year, we've had a number of different key achievements. These are just a snapshot of a few of them. Bridges in Midsummer Norton. When they came into the region, had taken on quite a big portfolio of work through Wessex Water. Unfortunately, due to demand, they weren't able to take on a lot of that portfolio. So they needed further M&E engineers, which were quite specialist. We worked closely with them, and we managed to access and gain £80,000 worth of WECA funding so that they could support and upskill their workforce, which allowed them to open up further opportunities at a lower level for residents within the area. You may have remembered from last year, or not, that I came along and mentioned that we'd managed to get some flexible support fund money through from DWP, and that was for us to deliver 2 different programmes. One of them was called the Women's Work Lab, which was supporting returners to work, lone parents, survivors of domestic abuse. We put on a year-long programme with 3 different cohorts, which supported 50 women, 40 of which actually finished and completed. And from that, 18 of those, and I believe it's actually gone to 21 now, are now in full-time or part-time employment. and have shown some progression route. We worked really closely with a number of businesses within the region as well, and also were interviewed by Mims Davis, MP. We handed over that portfolio and that project over to North Somerset, and they've now also delivered exactly the same programme. They've kind of updone us now though, but they've got interviewed by the BBC, which I believe is either showing tonight or was last night, interviewing some of the mums. The Employment and Skills Pod was an 18-month programme which was basically a one front door. So any resident in the region who was looking for work or information, advice and guidance, we were able to support them and help them progress into whatever route they needed. The funding for that finished in September, but we have just been awarded funding through from West of England Combined Authority to use this as a spoke to a hub model that they've created. And also the team were very much involved, certainly with the integral setup of the COVID grants. However, we did speak to over 9,000 individual businesses and supporting them with each application form that they needed and helping direct them over to the relevant services. So this is just an infographic of some of those details and projects. The one that I wanted to bring your attention to actually was the Invest in Bains, which I believe was on the agenda, and we'll be looking to bring that to the next scrutiny. It was originally called Invest in Bath, but we have gone through a process now of changing the branding for that. It has been slightly delayed because of the IT rollout with the laptops. However, we have had just under 12,000 individual hits and just under 3,000 subscribers. Shall I hand over to Regen?
Thanks, Claire. Yeah, I was going to just pick up a similar theme. Thank you, Richard. Similar theme with regeneration, which is our small team of 11 staff, 8 of which are supported through grant funding income, with 2 members supported through revenue funding from the council. The team works in partnership with businesses and communities, and it's centrally focused on designing and delivering development and cultural projects within Bath and North East Somerset, and many of you I know have seen and touched some of these projects. It focuses on the town centres and the high streets and Bath city centre, and has broadly delivered a large programme of high street improvement schemes, so Midsummer Norton High Street, the Town Hall project, the High Street Hub in Midsummer Norton, and some of the cultural activities that have been run from the High Street Hub, Keynsham High Street, York Street as public realms schemes, and Milsom Quarter Master Plan. It leverages in, as a small team, it leverages in funding to support the council's priorities and deliver out local outputs and outcomes. So again, it's kind of, had a number of kind of key achievements over the last year or so. One of them in particular that has been around supporting communities and pop-up shops, so particularly coming out of COVID and the pandemic, where we had vacant units. We've used vacant unit action funding to bring units back into use with pop-up and meanwhile uses, and supported a number of local businesses to help them up, and used funding to help those local businesses to reach markets that they struggle to by using council property as pop-up facilities. The future is set out, so a number of the projects around things like parklets on streets in a number of the district high streets, Twerton High Street, Southbound Parade. We have a series of high street projects running across the district in Bath, and then projects on that have now completed on Keynsham High Street and York Street works, and are ongoing in Midsummer Norton. And then again, master planning works. We're looking at 2 master plan projects. One was Milsom Quarter, which has been through now council decision making on drawing down West of England funding to start to bring that forward into a delivery plan, and Central Riverside, which is the area around Mambers Street, to start to think about the longer term ambition and plans around how that area develops and generates. So it's a broad spectrum of work with quite a small service team that deliver out on that to leverage grant funding in for Bath and North East Somerset's benefit. I was just going to hand over to Richard quickly on the enterprise zone update.
Thanks, Simon. So yes, I'll just give again a really quick one through on the enterprise zone. So the work the enterprise zone team particularly focuses within the enterprise zones. That's the enterprise zone in Bath and also the enterprise zone out in Midsummer Norton. Again, a number of you are aware of the activities that we undertake. I'll work this slide through in a kind of clockwise rotation, starting on the left. We really step in as a team where the private sector has failed. So failed to bring forward development, and that is usually because the cost of enabling infrastructure works to deliver out development is so cost prohibitive that the private sector can't intervene. And our role is to draw in, very similar to the Regen team, draw in capital grant funding from a number of sources, including the WECA, Homes England and the like. And we draw that money in to deliver the infrastructure works that de-risk the sites for delivery, predominantly, and that can be delivered by the private sector. It can also be delivered by the council in a couple of instances where we've already demonstrated that the council has the ability to build out in a couple of sites, and I'll come on to talk about those in a second. We are, again, a relatively small team. We're only 8. We're actually currently 7 because we have one off on maternity leave, so perhaps we'll have an addition to the team fairly soon. We do draw in external consultancy advice purely because otherwise we wouldn't be able to deliver the scale of this programme of activity. I'll start over on the left-hand side on this infographic, really quickly talking about Bath Quays South. So Bath Quays, as many of you know, is the council's flagship scheme. It's a new business district just to the west of the city centre. The council have actively intervened on Bath Quays South over here on the left-hand side with direct delivery at Bath Quays South, and that's essentially has delivered a new Grade A, 45,000 square foot Grade A office, along with the infrastructure and enabling works that allow that site to come forward. So that includes all the river defence works and the installation of the new bridge across the river. The number 1 Bath Quays has completed. We have our first tenants in occupation. Essentially, that it's a really strong support. It demonstrates to the market that if you build the right product and you have the right level of demand, even in the difficult economic times, you can still find the right tenants. There are very limited supply of offices in Bath. The other point just worth making, just so that you are all aware as councillors, because we always get asked the question, we are due to complete the public realm works and open the bridge by the end of this year, 2022, which is a great milestone for the city. And then progressively we'll move on to Bath Quays North, which is the area to the north of the river. We've just recently demolished Avon Street car park, as a lot of you will be aware. And progressively we've been de-risking that site. We are in a continuing dialogue with Legal & General, who is the council's development partner on Bath Quays North, and we are looking to try and unlock that scheme. It's landed at a difficult time, obviously, in the geopolitical market positioning, but we have a potential way forward that we are currently working up as an officer group that we will progressively bring forward to councillors over the coming 6 months or so, possibly as early next year, if we're able to move the conversation forward. Somer Valley Enterprise Zone is the economic intervention. It's an economic engine over in the Somer Valley, looking to deliver out 1,300 jobs. We are promoting that. The LPA is promoting that through a local development order. That is well advanced. We're looking to submit the local development order, which is essentially a planning context, sets the planning context for the site to come forward. We're looking to submit the LDO in December of this year. We're working with a key stakeholder group and other stakeholders to make sure that intervention is hitting all the marks in terms of quality of delivery, quality of space, quality of accommodation, but also hitting the right economic sectors as well in the Somer Valley. iStart is a small project that we've been working for about 4 years on with the universities. It is essentially a skills and curriculum intervention along with an linking with the University of Bath Innovation Centre. We've just secured the £1.44 million worth of funding. We've submitted now an implementation plan. That activity will be accelerated through what's called Phase 0 and starts in January. That's essentially a virtual set of activity taking place from January for iStart. The idea being we bring forward a full business case, or the partners, the University of Bath, Bath Spa University and the college, bring forward a business case towards the middle of next year to plant that iStart location on the Bath College City Centre campus. And BWR, in many ways, last but not least, is a significant intervention. It's BWR Phase 2 on the gasometer site in the city, looking to bring forward on the council-owned site as well as St William Land, about just over circa 1,000 homes at BWR Phase 2. We purchased the site a couple of years ago. We've secured £12.5 million of Home of England funding to de-risk that site. We've undertaken a lot of the enabling works to de-risk the site already, and we're moving forward with a planning application looking to come forward through AQUIS this side of Christmas for the council's side of that site. And this is just some rather nice images of Bath Quays as it was and as it is now in 2022. And the last one is just a quick shot of Somer Valley Enterprise Zone, just to demonstrate where we are with our master plan.
Thank you, Chair.
Right. No, that's fine. We now open it up to the panel members to grill you in the nicest possible way. Panel members, do you have any questions? Councillor Hughes, Councillor Dogood. Councillor Hughes.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I just want to say, obviously, Claire's team, thanks for doing a great job on helping in the area with the employment issues. And with the Somer Valley Enterprise Zone, I think finally we're feeling quite reassured in Midsummer Norton. I mean, it's been a decade of feet dragging. Finally, Richard's put together a package and an LDO which gives us some confidence that this is actually going to go forward in some sort of reasonable timescale. So we're all quite pleased. That's looking quite promising. And I know Simon and I have had meetings. Simon's kindly been over to Midsummer Norton to try and understand the issues that we have in our high streets. We still have a lot of concerns about the lack of investment. I mean, the town hall project is very interesting, and the market square, albeit one of the concerns locally is that the town hall regeneration is absorbing a huge amount of the funds. I mean, our town council have now borrowed under £1.5 million over 50 years towards the cost of regenerating the high street. That's still not enough money, so they've now had to take money away from other projects in the high street to try and plug the black hole of finance there, and that's still not enough. There's still, I think, about £500,000 of funding needed for that project. Our concern is that, we really need some investment in the rest of the high street. As I say, this is nothing that we haven't already discussed, Simon. We see a lot of investment in places like Keynsham, with the high street regeneration, civic centres and building apartment blocks. So again, we just really need to find a way to invest and regenerate the rest of the high street, not just the little section at the bottom where the town hall is. But no, generally, I think your team again are doing a good job of supporting us in Midsummer Norton. So thank you.
Thank you, Sean. I think I absolutely acknowledge on the high street there is more work to do, particularly around master planning, and we have some capacity master plan funding, don't we, put aside to start to rethink a large portion, particularly between South Road car park and the high street, and how some of those existing uses can be improved and brought together to develop. And I think that should remain one of our priorities as we go forward, to try and bring in more funding to support that work. So I absolutely acknowledge your point that we need to continue to work that through, and we will continue to try and develop the business case for intervention for Midsummer Norton High Street. I think there's been a huge amount of success down there. We've also got the opportunity to think about the hollies and think about how we repurpose and reuse the hollies to become more a vital kind of resource for the community as well, I think. So that's something else that I think the council should be looking to do as we move forward into the future.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think it's just important to, I mean, this development at the bottom of the high street, the market area, and that is, £2 million investment. It's great, and it will help It will help the town. But I think we have to keep things in context. I mean, Witherspoon spent over £3 million just building the pub in the high street, and that's had a limited effect on regeneration, a very limited effect on regeneration and footfall. So the amount of money that we're putting into the high street at the moment is tiny in compared to what's needed to make an impact. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Dogood.
Yep, I've got 3 questions. Which one of you two is handling I Start? Because it's always, you are. Right, okay. I'll go on to that last then. And this may be for Simon, give us a view. Bath Quay's huge investment, hugely important for Bath in particular going forward. A lot of discussions about post-COVID world of hybrid working. Are you pretty satisfied as a senior management team that the Quays is still relevant to the agenda of 2025 and 2030 in terms of what's needed for a modern hybrid office?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, I think post-COVID, it's actually reinforced a move towards quality rather than quantity. And so bringing modern, high-quality office space to the market rather than relatively low-grade, poor-quality space what we found with the existing tenants that have been coming in is what they want is flexibility and a high-quality space. Businesses are still require a base to do work. And what we're finding is that what they want to create is the most flexible base possible. So particularly for what's been evidenced through the fit out on the current incumbents within Bath Quays is actually they're creating a very modern, flexible office environment for their workforce to come in part-time to use. And it's not all set aside with desk spaces and high density sort of work areas. Actually, it's very flexible and much more flexible workspace and breakout spaces and meeting rooms, because they're finding that their businesses still need to come together to innovate and to be creative, and that is driving a demand in space that requires a higher quality and better specification of space. What's really interesting as well is from an investment perspective, the quantity of development that we're promoting at Bath Quays, particularly in the business uses, is still very much, there's still evidence demand for that quantum of space. So from a legal and general perspective, COVID hasn't really changed the mix of uses or the demand for the quantity of space. I think the challenge is that the certainty around occupational interest is not quite as clear going with the current, as Richard said, the current geopolitical and economic circumstances means it's harder to predict when those businesses are going to want to take that space and where they're going to come from. So I think that's been really encouraging, actually.
Yeah, I mean, just if I'm informed correctly, Bath seems to be one of the few places investing in new office accommodation. Certainly if you look at a corridor from London and the M4 southwards. So that's good. But how much migration do you think there will be of existing office in the city centre going over to the Quays? And how, if you could give that as a percentage, that would be interesting. And therefore, from that figure, how important is getting outside investment, both international and UK-based in getting in? And what are we doing in order to get that outside of Bath investment? Are we reliant on the West of England Combined Authority as a lead generator, or are we doing our own thing?
I think for the purpose of what's available now, so Bath Quays South provides over 100,000 square feet of new office space between the Newark Works building, which is the refurbished former Crane Works shed, and the new office that we invested and constructed in. What we're finding is majoritively that space the inquiries for that space is predominantly from existing Bath businesses that are struggling to grow, struggling to retain staff, and struggling to find modern space that meets their needs within the city. So broadly, that first 100,000 square feet is swallowing up unmet demand within the local market, and isn't really requiring a huge amount of inward investment opportunity to bring businesses in. Across the Quays as a whole, I think I'm right in saying, Richard, when you add the two bits together, there is about 250,000 square feet of new office proposed. So about a third of that we're expecting to meet local need. That means that the future phase is very much reliant upon inward investment and future growth and future businesses finding Bath or growing in Bath to a level that they need that type of accommodation. And at the moment, Invest Bristol and Bath, which is WECA's inward investment arm, are our principal portal into inquiries for that additional space. We're not doing anything actively yet, but that's predominantly because that space doesn't exist, and with uncertainty around the delivery programme for Legal and General to commit, we're not actually at a stage where we can start marketing with certainty that we need to find occupiers for that space.
If I may just continue, Chair. Very pleased about Invest in Baines. I think it was Councillor McPhee who pointed out it was a bit Bath-centric, but I'll let him take the glory for that. On iStart, then this is as it came across here, we've been 4 years in the making, and I think it was 1.44 million. This is a bigger deal as far as the West of England Combined Authority. You're regarded as the beacon unitary authority in leading this, not just in WECA and in others. So can you just give us a bit more about where we are in iStart? A, what the principle is, because I think there's a principal objective and there's a secondary objective of getting the two universities and Bath College to actually work together strategically for the skills need that we have here. So just give us a bit more of where we are in that 4-year journey and what the end output is we're looking for, if you could, please.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you, Councillor Dugan. I think actually where we started with iStart was that there wasn't a relationship between the universities and the college. That relationship has developed over the last 4 years, and I think is now stronger and more resilient as a conversation. So when future difficult conversations might happen between the two universities, I think it's more easy for those conversations to be had because the relationships are there. iStart started out in an earlier iteration, which was, and it has iterated over the last 4 years. We're actually submitted in April of this year. It was OBC Outline Business Case 4, so it's the 4th time we've been to WECA with an outline business case. The focus is very much around on the business and skills front, which is really being driven by Bath Spa University and Bath College. The focus is very much around delivering a modular curriculum, and what I mean by that is that it's almost like a pick and mix. It means that rather than being driven to take on to develop your skill set through a very generic route, you can be quite bespoke and you can pick modules out of this modular curriculum and build up your skill base over a period of time. If you are an employee or an employer, you can put your own staff through that route and develop a skill base that's bespoke for you as an employer in Bath. But it is also seen as it is very much, as you pointed out, Winston, it's very much seen as a regional offer. So we're not just thinking about Bath-based businesses, but also more broadly West Country, Western businesses as well. And then the other side to iStart is the innovation piece. That's very much driven by University of Bath with their innovation centre and their relationship with Set Squared, which is a preeminent manager of this type of innovation space in the country. The way that the synergy between the two is that through the innovation activities, when those innovation companies, as they're incubated and grown as new businesses in the location, they may well have a requirement for a certain type of particular skill set. We can develop that skill set within the modular curriculum that's being delivered through iStart. So you're getting bespoke training for potential new businesses in the innovation centre, as well as existing businesses in Bath. That's pretty unique. It does exist elsewhere. It doesn't exist anywhere else in the UK with two universities and a college. It does exist where you have a university and a college, but it's a real rare. Well, we are unique in that proposition with the two universities, and they play to their own skill sets. So we had the very strong academic side of and research bent of University of Bath, and that very arts creative side to Bath Spa University. There's a really very neat fit there between those two organisations. Yeah.
I have got a third question, but I'm hogging it, so I'll defer.
Councillor Hounslow, you have some questions.
Thank you. Firstly, a very quick thank you to the Employment and Skills team. Claire Middlehurst, Sandy Cork came out and supported the Salford Jobs Fair in September. Tracy Kovacs from Cool Ventures was there as well, organised by the Communities Association and the Salford Business Network, and it went really well. It's going to be repeated in February, so I'm sure you'll give support to that. My question is around Keynsham High Street and what's been happening since the refurbishment of the High Street. If I can just reference a few things, and then perhaps you can feedback on them more generally. I believe you've engaged a transport consultancy, IMA, to come up with post-scheme completion data, such as footfall, vehicle movements. So I'm interested where we are with that. I believe Helen Griffiths is working with the Town Council and a company called Movement Strategies for further data on the High Street, including the amount of money that's actually being spent. Also, I believe Helen is working with the Town Council on a High Street business directory and a support local Keynsham campaign. As you probably are aware, there's been the closure recently of the Church's newsagent and now the Buses greengrocers that have been established for a long, long time. And there have been negative stories around people falling. It's really important that there's good news put out there for Keynsham. So can you tell us where we are with all those initiatives?
Thank you, yeah. On the point of evaluation, part of the IMA, who are a consultancy, were appointed at the outset to do a post-scheme evaluation of the improvements in terms of what's it meant to the economy and the local traders. Has it improved their trading conditions? Has footfall increased, or is it, how does it compare to pre-scheme world? We have just had the post-scheme evaluation report, and that will be completed and sort of made public in due course quite soon. But I think the outcome of that has been that overall footfall in the High Street is up. However, much of that footfall increases at weekends, and what's been experienced is a midweek reduction in footfall in the High Street. So we're just trying to evaluate what's driving that and what does it mean. Because so overall, the numbers are increasing, but the pattern of use is very much changed, and it's trying to evaluate what impact does the scheme have on that changing pattern, versus what impact wider working pattern behaviours have, particularly midweek working pattern behaviours, with things like the council and the civic centre. With the council's hybrid working policies means there's far less staff in the office now than there was because the pre-scheme evaluation was prior to COVID. So you're comparing a pre-COVID world of occupancy with a post-COVID world of occupancy plus a scheme change. So that point is we're quite alive to. Some of the additional projects now around Temple Street and the improvements to the Temple Street end, we're hoping will add further to the improvements, particularly around some of the economic activity that takes place alongside the high street retailing. So I think that needs to be evaluated. On the kind of safety measures we've been monitoring and tracking, we had a number of unfortunate accidents and incidents post-scheme opening. The number of those has dramatically reduced now, despite some of the social media kind of claims that are going on. Actually, when we evidence the actual reports of accidents and relate those through into insurance claims, the numbers have dramatically reduced, and we've only experienced one or two since making the cycle lane red and changing the colour contrast so that the colour contrast is much clearer and much more legible to people. So we're just evaluating that at the moment, but definitely the number of incidents has dropped away from that. Sorry, your third question.
Right, it was about the Town Council, High Street Business Directory, well, and importantly, the support local Keynsham campaign. I think it's something really positive that grabs the headlines.
I'm afraid I'll have to take that one away and ask the team, but I'll note the point around the positive kind of marketing campaign around the space. Thank you.
So,
Thank you. The answer is I believe so, but I need to check because there's been a couple of facilities that we've not reinstated again. So I'll just double check to make sure it's the right one.
yeah, and obviously I'm a bit conscious of not diverting you from other tasks that you've got, but it was incredibly useful to have that local data. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Singleton.
Thanks, Chair. A couple of questions. One is lots of talk and some concerns about the government's investment zones initiative or scheme. And I'm just wondering how that might impact on current plans, and given that you are a fairly tight team, that if there was some success there, whether that might change overall strategy. The second one was a very minor one. Under green skills, there was talk of repurposing methane gas, which sounds slightly alarmingly, and I just wondered what on earth that means.
I don't think I can respond on the second question. I'm not quite sure what it means myself. Very, very happy to pick up on investment zones. So thank you, Councillor. As councillors are aware, we, as an authority, we did submit 2 sites into the investment zone expression of interest. That was Bath Quays and Somer Valley, both of which we presented on earlier on. The investment zones post the autumn statement have actually been, the expression of interest has been pulled. So the investment zones, as they were designed, as they were proposed, are no longer proceeding. And we have received a very nice note. Well, actually, we haven't actually. We've received a generic comment from central government thanking everyone for the efforts. What's the next stage in terms of investment zones is that DLUC will be looking at repurposing their approach to investment zones and focusing in on growth clusters, particularly linked in generally in areas where there is a research link with the university, trying to leverage growth and development out of that relationship between local universities on the research front and new innovative businesses. There's a piece of work that will develop around that. We don't know more than that at the moment, but that is the next stage. We had Simon and I had a meeting with DLUC last week, at which they said this is the next stage. We haven't got the funding. We don't know what the funding is going to look like for that going forward. But there is an opportunity potentially there, clearly with our 2 universities, particularly on the research front with the University of Bath, to develop a potential growth cluster in this region. There are clearly other locations in the region with Bristol Science Park as well that may well look to focusing on that. So that is the next stage in the investment zones, but we don't know more than that at the moment.
Lovely, thank you. Councillor Hodge.
Hello, I'll be quick because I know we're short of time. I just wondered I've had an inquiry from a Lansdowne resident about North Quays and the potential for fitting out some of the, if there's office space or even in South Quays for lab and office space combined. There's a shortage of space for biotech and science startups, particularly with all the skills we have. We've got that skill base with the university, and they're having to go over to Bristol to develop their businesses, and they've kind of suggested the Temple Quarter in Bristol is meeting that needs, and we're not in Bath. I just wondered any plans.
Very live conversation. There's an evidenced market need in the southwest to grow our science and technology. They call it SciTech, but science and technology clustering, particularly around life sciences and dry lab space. So as distinct from sort of wet lab space. there's a particular requirement for technology industries to access dry lab. There are 2 initiatives happening in Bath at the moment which are interesting. One is, and you may have picked it up, but the landowner of Debenhams has submitted a planning application to convert Debenhams into lab space, so the upper floors into employment space. Right. And my understanding is that is now in the system, in the planning system has been submitted. So that's quite an interesting change, which is that they're looking to convert the upper floors, the former Debenhams store when Debenhams closed. They'll keep the ground floor as retail, but there are 2 other big floors in there, which they're looking to convert, which then becomes a sort of a basis for some of that clustering of technology. And our conversations on North Quays are working towards some of those office facilities potentially being fitted out to a higher standard that could accommodate lab space for technology businesses. So I think that's very much the direction of travel at the moment.
Are you interested in being linked in with entrepreneurs that have done that path and ended up going elsewhere? But
yes, very much so. Yeah, any inquiries or any kind of market intelligence or contacts in that would be really, really helpful. Thank you.
That sounds great. Councillor McPhee.
I wanted to say how well the member of staff, Beth Whaley, who's working in with us, and the work that she's doing. She's already made a heritage trail and is organising a number of things. And these things are designed, if you like, to support the work that's been done. And I commend her, very enthusiastic, and also the idea of it. I just did want to come back to the falls, because certainly I think we need a meeting really to discuss this properly. I think people are still falling. It may be that they're not damaging themselves as much as they did, but they're still falling. And the method of recording is a little bit, it hasn't been well coordinated, I don't think. So I think we need something to finish off on that, but certainly very positive about Beth Whaley.
Thank you, and I think it's an acknowledgement that quite often we spend too much time talking about the physical regeneration rather than the social regeneration, and I think the team have put a lot of effort into engaging activities where they can really build kind of social benefits from the community activities. So a similar thing in Midsummer Norton around the filming they've done with the local school around some of the activities around the history of Midsummer Norton as well has proved really successful to engaging the community and developing a pride of place and identifying. So that we do, and on the second point, we do have a meeting in the diary for January, so we are doing some evaluation. There are a number of live insurance claims at the moment that are working through the system, but there is a date and meeting in the diary with ward councillors to review those accident statistics and the current situation and if there are further mitigations.
Thank you very much. Councillor Davies.
I wasn't going to speak, but actually what Councillor Councillor McPhee said just a moment ago picked up something, because I had a letter from a resident, and I don't represent a Keynsham area, about someone who fell at the beginning of November, and I was going to ask how you recorded these things, because she'd sent it to Council Connect and had heard nothing back. She ended up, it says here, taken to A&E, RUH for the resulting injuries to her face. So she was concerned, and I was just going to check which way you were recording things, which is really what you've just picked up, Councillor McPhee, on the bits you said. So really, it's to reiterate that does seem to be quite an important thing to follow through. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think in terms of that, we've tried to be really consistent. So if whichever approach or route into the council a member of the public takes, be it through Council Connect, the signposting and the recording of it is all through Fix My Streets. It's a public highway, and the record keeping is around an accident within the public highway, which is on Fix My Street. So that is our kind of single point of reference for all recorded accidents, and I think all contact points into the council direct towards that. If you have experienced where there is knowledge that that hasn't been the case, though, I'm very interested to know, because we've worked quite hard to create a singular reference point for all those contacts and inquiries.
So just to clarify, so she went to Council Connect, and so that will therefore go automatically then to Council. Yeah, but it's very difficult to say to someone, I mean, she's an older lady, and to say, you know, they've had a fall and everything, oh, by the way, you should have gone this route. It's not, you know, and, which is why it's quite right that you're doing it. Fine, thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, I've got some questions as well, but Councillor Duguid, you do, if it's short.
Right, it is. 2 questions. Very short, interrelated. I don't know whether it's Councillor Samuel or Councillor Guy, but we had an update on footfall about 3 or 4 weeks ago. Ours seemed to be increasing in Bath in particular against the national picture. So if you've got any update on that. I am particularly concerned that you may be a victim of your success on the Christmas market. Those that I've known that lived here for 30 years have never seen Bath so packed as it was on Saturday. I was called out to look at 26 coaches on Wells Way, and when I went up to Odd Down Park and Ride, the new facility, the extended facility for coaches was full, and for the first time in my experience of living in Bath, the Odd Down Park and Ride was actually full. I know there was a train strike, but I'm worried about December the 10th, because Bath are playing at home, and there's an afternoon kick-off, and I think in years up to 2019, we didn't have Bath playing at home on a Saturday. They were playing on a Friday night, as they are this coming Friday night. Are we going to be able to cope on December the 10th? And any update on the footfall?
There's no train strikes on December the 10th, thankfully, so hopefully that will help. And we have opened an extended area of Avon Street car park back now that we've finished white lining the demolished area. But it's not our service area in terms of the it's place management, and Chris May's area actually actively manage the Christmas market and the dynamics of the city. So from an economic development point of view, I think it's interesting to understand whether the city can, you know, manage the level of interest in the Christmas market. I don't have updated footfall figures. I think they normally, we're reliant on the bid to get those through. They do get weekly counts, and I can get you some updated figures, but I'm sorry, Winston, I don't have them to hand. It is interesting that the infrastructure is kind of creaking, and it probably, for future years, you know, it's the first year we've had a proper Christmas market again post-COVID. We did, you know, the previous years has been a more muted affair, and this has really kind of stepped back up to business as usual for the city. So it's going to be quite an interesting conversation as to whether we think it's the right format for the future or whether we should review it and do something different.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I have a couple of questions that are fairly specific on the office building, number 1, Bath Quays. You say that the public realm is completed. Is the fit-out completed yet? I'm assuming not.
So number 1, Bath Quays, the building itself was completed in May of last year, practically completed then. What I meant by fit out is that's tenants fitting out their space. So we've built it to a certain category. Tenants then come in and fit out themselves. So we have the 4th floor, the whole of the 4th floor and half of the 1st floor is now occupied by tenants. And actually, if you go past, although you won't necessarily see it in the evening because the back blinds are down, but to stop the light spill, but you will see lights are on in number 1 Bath Quays on the 4th floor and half the 1st floor.
So that's 1.5 floors they're rented
Correct.
out. Right, okay. And I'm assuming you've got a sales pipeline with people coming forward, which is great. And those people it sounds like obviously they're in and they're paying rent now.
They've been in occupation since around about the middle of October. They're subject to commercial terms. There is an element of rent-free, but they will be, their rent will trip in due course, correct?
Oh, right, okay. What happens to the business rates on the empty properties? Does the council pay itself, or how does that work? Is a transfer a nominal ledger? Maybe I should be asking Andy.
We've, because the other floors on the number 1 are not yet fitted out, they're not yet they don't become rateable.
Rateable until, right.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Great, that's lovely.
And just on the wider point, because we do sometimes forget, but the Newark Works, which is the refurbished space, that's now all pretty much fully fitted out. So there are businesses going into there. That's much more diverse as a business space. So there are spaces there that can accommodate small businesses of 3 to 4 people, right up to some fairly large business spaces for about 50 people. And they've got a tenant pipeline, but they're fitted out across that building as well.
Right, okay.
So that's now active and live. There are some tenants in the Newark Works as well.
And there was I think there was an article in the CIPD People magazine that said working from home had peaked. I don't know if that's interesting intelligence for you, but that might be something to look out for as well.
I'm certainly had enough of it anyway.
Okay, that's lovely. Right, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your presentation. That was great to find out a bit more about that. Right, so can I now move on to item number 10, which is the medium-term financial plan? And Councillor Samuel, I'm assuming that you would like to introduce this item for us.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Well, as we move towards the budget setting in February, I think it's probably worth saying that of the 3 budgets I've done up to now, next year's will be the 4th. This is by far the hardest one that we are having to deal with. The economic climate in which we're operating is severe. We'll come on to that in terms of inflation. Interest rates are rising, and generally we are seeing sector-specific increases in costs, which are hitting us in all sorts of different ways. Aside from the energy stuff, and we'll cover all of this. But I mean, just going back to the medium-term financial strategy which Cabinet approved last month, this isn't the answer to the problem. The MTFS really highlights the environment in which the Council is going to be operating, and it is going to be an inflationary environment for the next 2 or 3 years. We know that for sure. And in fact, we're in the Bank of England believes we're in the highest inflation quarter now, at just over 11%. So that's the kind of context. I guess you all know that. We'll touch a bit on the autumn statement and some of the implications for that. I think I said at Council last week, this is not the saviour. The autumn statement is not the saviour of local government. There was more money in the autumn statement for adult social care, but nothing else, essentially. So that hasn't really helped us at all. And the big pressing area, which I would have liked to have seen some assistance on, was children's services, which we are overspending on, like every other council, because the whole system is completely broken. So there is a big problem in children's services, and it's not the kids that are the problem, it's the systems with which we have to work with and the responsibilities we have. So that is quite difficult. All those non-social care services are going to see big increases and pressures in their costs, and unfortunately demand is not letting up at the same time. So we are pretty boxed in, I think, for next year. And I think if you take a high-level look at the kind of economic environment for local government, tucked away in the Chancellor's statement was actually the fact that nearly all the pain is being levied now between 23 and 25. And then what we see then are public sector spending cuts kicking in of 0.7% across the board each year. And if inflation is added to that, you can see that there will be real terms cuts in public spending from 2025 onwards. And of course, 2025 is not a coincidental date. It's when the next general election is. So, this is being quite carefully managed in that sense. I won't say any more on the outlook, the economic outlook. I mean, inflation is serious for us. We had to absorb this year the impact of the local government pay settlement, which came in much higher than we or anybody else was expecting. And we expect next year's pay settlement for staff to be similarly, probably in the same kind of range. So that's not a great environment. And what we are facing at the moment is trying to bridge what is somewhere around 20 million gap between our funding and our expenditure next year, and 36 million over the lifespan of that strategy. So clearly, Council is going to have to do something very different in the next few years. So that's very gloomy, unfortunately, but it's worth saying. And I think there will be no presents in February. There can't be, because the environment we're operating in is very, very tough and very, very tight. So Andy's going to fill in some of the facts and figures there, and then when we both finish, we'll take questions.
Thank you, Richard. So I'm going to just walk through a few components of the medium-term financial strategy report. So I'm going to start on this page 52 of the papers for today's meeting. So that's section 5, the current financial position. So this really sets out the current performance financially for the council. So I think the first thing to note is the council's got a really strong track record in terms of financial performance, and looking at the 21-22 revenue budget outturn, that was really good performance. There was a underspend position and also a 4 million transfer to council reserves. In the main, this is due to performance on car parking, which was above budgeted levels. It bounced back much quicker than modelled in terms of coming out of the pandemic, in terms of footfall, as we talked about earlier, and that has helped the council's budget, and also underspends in adult social care, which has contributed also to that transfer to reserves. But also some pressures were offset. There's been significant budget funding pressures into children's social care, as Councillor Samuel touched on, and those cost pressures were felt last financial year and have continued into this financial year. So that can be also seen when we look at the current year. So at Q2, the report that forecasts our year-end position that was reported to Cabinet has highlighted that the financial pressure and challenge in year is being felt by the council, and this is in the main due to inflationary pressures. We're predicting a above budget position of 4.5 million, and in the main that is down to high cost across all components of children's social care, right from social workers needed to manage caseloads through to the care packages that are being delivered, but also the transport that takes children to school with special education needs. So all aspects of the service are really been exposed to demand, but also inflation pressures. I think the other key component to touch on in year is also the National Employers Offer for the pay uplift. That was higher than the budgeted level at 3%. It's been a flat rate pay offer across all staff across the council, and that's averaged out at around 7%, so that has added to the costs in year. There are good elements of good performance though, so we are still seeing a good performance in terms of the income trends. The income generated by the Roman baths is higher than budgeted. The footfall has been good, but also what colleagues in the service are seeing is a higher spend per visiting customer. So that's really good in terms of general performance of that asset, and that asset contributing towards the running cost of the council. And that has also continued in terms of our commercial estate. The market interest has remained strong and also come back a little bit faster than anticipated. So there's an above budget position on commercial estate income. And also across a range of our council support services, there's a number of general underspends that have also helped contribute to some of those pressures. But when we look at the net position, it is still anticipated at 4.5 million over budget. So the council's management team are putting in financial recovery measures. We've stepped up the sort of the financial governance we put in place when COVID came in, around putting in a financial recovery board that's got the council's senior leadership team on, and colleagues across all services are looking at ways they can help contribute towards that wider corporate pressure of 4.5 million. So we are looking at service-wide mitigations that will help fund some of those rising costs on pay, but also in children's social care. So those mitigations will be reported back to Cabinet in Q3. I think the next section to really focus in terms of financial strategy is section 6, the drivers of demand. As Councillor Samuel said, the real change that's driving the challenges in this year's budget is rising inflation and the cost of living. So the report focuses more on the economic outlook than it has done in previous years. We've incorporated some new information in terms of looking at GDP analysis. And I think that does highlight that whilst the gross domestic product really dipped during COVID, it did come back quite quickly in terms of growth. I think that growth has impacted on the rise in inflation because what it's led to is demand shortages when it comes to supply of services. So supply shortage does lead to rising costs, and that has impacted on the council. The graph also shows the rising cost of construction, and that has been felt by council contracts when we're looking at capital investment. So as a measure to inflation rising, the Bank of England has raised its interest rate. It is currently at 3%. So that is a measure that the Bank of England have put in terms of a measure to slow down spending. So that does bring a range of sort of different aspects to the council. In terms of council borrowing, it does make our borrowing more expensive, so significant investment in capital schemes comes at a higher cost to service that borrowing. But also, where we invest money as a council, we are getting a better return. So our money that we invest in direct sort of money market funds is generating a better interest rate to the council. So that has helped the revenue position. As I touched on earlier, in terms of the in-year position, income performance has remained strong and ahead of budgeted levels. However, when we do look at our activity-driven services such as social care, they are costing a lot more money when we look at rising activity and higher cost per package of care. I think the other key part of the report to just focus in on is Section 8, council tax. So when we benchmark across the whole South West, Bath and North East Somerset council tax levels are the third lowest in the region. That does demonstrate that the services provided to Bath and North East Somerset residents and council taxpayers are very good value for money. However, when we look at areas like commercial income being impacted as a result of COVID, it means that our funding levers aren't quite as high as other councils when we look at income generated from council tax. So we've modelled in the financial strategy a council tax increase at 2.99%. And I think that's probably a similar approach taken to many of our neighbours. As Councillor Samuel said, in terms of the Chancellor's budget announcement, the referendum limit is being increased to 4.99%. That 2% hasn't been factored into these numbers because that was announced after this report was drafted. I think the next bit to move on to is the financial outlook in terms of the budget challenge over the next 5 years. The biggest funding aspect of the 5-year plan is next year. This is correcting our in-year budget to take into account inflation demand that the council's experiencing now in terms of cost of running services, but then overlaying that with the continuing inflation that we expect to really go throughout to the next year and potentially into the following year. So to bring the council's cost base back in line with the cost of running the council, when you take into account inflation, that creates a big budget gap, and it's around 20 million next year. And work's underway looking at savings plans, but also other income levers the council has to keep pace with inflation, to put in a set of proposals that will close that gap and bring us into a balanced budget position for next year. In terms of the risk exposure, the financial strategy has looked at a range. So the base case is the middle range. We've also modelled a reduction in government grant funding that it could potentially increase the gap to 22.6 million, but also some more upside in terms of what might come through the provisional settlement, which is in this instance a retention of the business rates that we hold, and that would have a benefit, and it would reduce our budget gap next year to 16.2 million. So I think this is a key component of the financial strategy to demonstrate that we're looking at risk and then testing some of those tolerance levels. So the proposals that at this stage we're modelling on in terms of our savings and income targets are reasonable. I think the final piece of note is our capital programme. We are conducting a review of our capital programme in terms of ensuring that we can maintain a good delivery profile on all of the approved schemes and provisional schemes in the programme, but we also are assessing affordability levels. So we're looking at the future borrowing rates at a higher level because of the rise in Bank of England rate. So we're really testing deliverability within the programme to make sure the budget proposal does have a fully tested programme to make sure we've got a sensible profile that won't overexpose the council in terms of affordability. I think they're the key parts of the paper to bring to the panel's attention. So, Chair, I think that's it from me. Thanks.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Right, we're going to open the floor to questions. Do any of the panel have any questions for the Cabinet Member or the officer? Councillor Hodge.
So I've just got some on the figures for the funding gap on the total, the breakdown of the budget requirement funding gap. Just simple questions really. The settlement grant funding, I just wanted to understand that, what that means and why it's 5 million last year and it's something that isn't in there this year. The budget rebasing, so it's 3.3 million that's in. I didn't get a chance to go back to the text to see which budgets had been rebased. I missed which ones those were. And I was wondering whether the amount in for contract inflation, so 3.65 is up from 2 million the last budget. Is that enough, and what the basis for that was? And then the demographic growth is down a little bit, and I just wondered why it's down a little bit from last year. I wondered why that would be. And then the proposed saving plans that are already in there of 2.3 million, what they're based on. Is that okay?
Thanks, Councillor Hodge. So I think the first question was around, was it the funding reduction from last year to this year?
Councillor Hodge, is your speaker on? Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, last year the funding gap, a big proportion of it was settlement grant funding, 5.5 million, which isn't something that is in there this year. I mean, it must be something obvious. I just wondered what it was.
Well, I think in practice it's a mixture of grants. So when we get the settlement, not all of them are current. Okay. So what the financial plan assumes is that some of the one-off grants drop out.
Right.
Also, the budget proposal last year, because it was going through the recovery period from COVID, there's some use of one-off money, so that drops out also. Right. So what that means is that sort of general below-the-line money, in addition to council tax, has dropped out by around 5 million. We compare one year to the other.
Yeah.
However, the numbers will be refreshed when we get the detail on all of the announcements that came from government over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah. Okay. Do you want me to go through the other questions?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, sorry.
I'll keep the running order.
Yeah, so the rebasing, so some budgets have gone up to 3.3 million is in there as a cost that needs to be met, and demographic growth is a little bit down from last time. I wonder why that was, and whether contract inflation is at 3.65 million as opposed to 2 last time. It doesn't seem a huge increase, and how you came to that figure. Yeah. And then the savings plans that you've mentioned all the way through of 2.32 million, what are they?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So in terms of the demographic growth, because what we've faced in year and that has flowed through to the Q2 forecast is significant pressures on key services such as children's social care. So rather than putting that in the budget as general demographics, the proposal for next year around looking at the drivers of the costs has got a fundamental rebase on the children's social care budget. So it's in another line. It's, if I look in here, we've got budget pressures and rebasing. So a lot of the demographics are wrapped up in the 3.3 million budget pressures that flow through the activity levels we're seeing now into next year. Okay. So the demographics are for new demands next year, where we've got a roll forward of current costs into next year's budget that sets a rebase.
Okay.
And then the next question was on contract inflation.
Yeah,
it's the same principle. really. So we've got a number of key services that are more exposed to contract inflation, like home to school transports. That uplift is included into the budget pressure and rebasing line. So then we've got our sort of core uplift figures that roll forward existing contract inflation, where it is linked to the actual contract, which is a lower figure.
Right. Okay.
And I think the final one was on the indicative savings.
Yes, that are in
So, yeah, they're currently being reviewed as part of our savings process, but these are the year 2 savings that went through the budget report to full council in February. So one of the larger figures is an additional uplift in the commercial estate income targets of £1 million, where we've modelled the impact of the market interest and more lettings of void units, so it creates more income to the council. I think in those figures also there's a fairly large figure on children's services around additional foster care placements that will prevent higher cost placements that will deliver some benefit to the council.
Okay, lovely, thank you.
Councillor Hansell.
Thank you. This question might be better left to a budget discussion, but Councillor Samuel was talking about how tough the financial situation is, particularly for next year. Think about this year. I'll use an example to illustrate. £250,000 was earmarked for finding alternative moorings on our river. Where schemes like that haven't yet spent all their money because it's just that they haven't worked through, is that money still secure? Is it still safe? Will there be any raid on current budget items to help finance next year?
That's a bit difficult to answer at this stage, and I'm not hedging it deliberately, Councillor Hansell, but the way I'm looking at this is I'm looking ahead over 5 years, because the council has committed already to some very hefty projects over the next 5 years. You heard that Bath Quays will probably come forward in some shape or form over that next 5-year period. The Fashion Museum has to be re-provided. That'll happen in the next 5 years. There is a hefty contribution to make to the City Region Sustainable Transport Settlement with WECA. We have to find a big chunk of money that comes out of planning permissions and other sources. So we have quite a lot of big numbers piling up, and there's also the waste project, the waste and recycling project, with the re-provision of a Bath recycling site. So these are big numbers, and those will have to, the nature of capital projects is once you've jumped in, you've got to go. You have to finish them. You can't suddenly change direction halfway through. So one of the things I'm looking for over the next few weeks is to get a sense of what that capital demand is going to be on the council. How far can we meet some of that by receipts? And my guess is probably go nowhere near that. And where can we expect grant funding, and where will we have to borrow? And the borrowing is the key bit because it hits the revenue budget in terms of the repayments. So I think in terms of the review at the moment, and obviously ultimately this will be a decision for members of council, it's difficult to see that we will be able to sustain everything. But I wouldn't particularly pick on the project you'd highlighted, but it's difficult to see whether we will be able to do everything when we wanted to. And there may be elements of rephasing that have to take place. I don't know at this stage. But the other point I wanted to make, which I did make at council, but that you've got the figures in front of you now, it makes a bit more sense. If you extrapolate forward from 2009, which is what I call the last normal year of council budgets, when the council used to receive in those days what was called revenue support grant, and if you project ahead what the council was spending in 29-10 to what it was spending now, if that figure had been uprated with the changes in inflation that have happened over that decade, we would be spending 170 million. And as you can see from these figures, we're nowhere near that. So the council has effectively shrunk its spending substantially over that decade. And my calculation, based on the revenue support grant levels we used to receive between 2000 and 2010, is the council has lost 120 million of central government grant in that period. Now, these are shockingly large figures, and we're not the only council, you know, not picking us out particularly. Every council has lost revenue support grant, and that is the problem. The problem is right at the heart of the affordability of local government, and the ability of councillors to settle budgets is severely constrained by the loss of central government money. I'm afraid it was all cut in the coalition years, the Osborne budgets. These were the ones that did the damage in 2011, and they have not been restored. And as Andy says, what is left now is a sort of pick and mix of one-off grants and of a substantially less money than the council used to get a decade ago. So all these things are contributing to build the problem. And basically, I mean, my analogy is that money is being sucked out of local government. We are being defunded year on year, every single year. And it's getting to a point where some councils are effectively bankrupt now. So, you know, and capital is part of that big mix, because capital is expensive to do, and especially in the current climate. So I know I haven't answered your question there, Duncan. But
Okay, does anybody else have any questions? Councillor Hughes.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions, more to do with strategy than anything else. Because I'm genuinely just want to understand a couple of areas. One, we say that we're looking to rebalance the economy to reduce the dependency on retail, hospitality and tourism. I'm just wondering, because we've lost a lot of industrial zones in Bath over recent times. Things like the Soma Valley Enterprise Zone is more than 2 years away. So I'm just wondering what the strategy is there, because I would have thought that perhaps, certainly hospitality and tourism are areas where we could potentially see growth over the next 2 years if we were to put some work into that. We know that we could, you know, we get a lot of visitors come to Bath for day trips on coaches, and they stay at hotels in places like London. So I think there's areas perhaps on that area that could see short-term gain over the 2 years. So I'm just wondering what the strategy is on that.
That's a good question, Councillor Hughes. I think the strategy was really informed by COVID in the first instance, that, you know, Bath specifically, Bath City Centre is really reliant on tourist income and retail income. So the strategy sets out, and this is over a long time, to, I say, not reduce that reliance or income level, actually grow it, but also diversify its income streams. So more investment into office space, but also where we hold assets that maybe historically have generated retail income, but not huge amounts, but that asset could be used for something different, like housing or offices to repurpose. So we look at the mix of the income generating assets. So over time, we have a better kind of percentage breakdown of our income streams, but obviously grow retail and tourism income where possible. And I think the performance in the Roman Bath has demonstrated that actually it's not all about numbers as well. You can increase profitability, so that's really good performance. But however, longer term wise, I think it's definitely looking at that regional growth, and not having growth just in the centre of Bath. It's all about North East Somerset and getting areas like the enterprise zones in North East Somerset, the Soma Valley, moving forwards. These things do take time in terms of planning and investments. So, but that's all of the seeds are being planted now for some of that strategy to start yielding its benefits in future years.
Thank you. And that sounds great. I mean, I just think that perhaps maybe you need to look at the wording of the 2-year strategy in the document that we've had, because it seems to point towards, say, a reduction in retail, hospitality and tourism. So.
Absolutely, but in the short term, some of that has been impacted by COVID, so there has been reductions, but over time, again, it's it'll go back.
A longer term strategy.
But there's, I think it's a good point to note for the panel, because there is that transition from COVID where it has been reliance on retail and it has dropped, so it's about growing it back, because if you take the Roman Baths, the net return to the council is still a lot lower to pre-COVID levels, and that's going to take a bit more time.
Okay, thank you. And do I have a second question? So my second question was to do with the parking services. So obviously it's a significant income for us, the parking services. And we seem to sort of be at odds because on one hand we're trying to encourage people to use park and rides, which I'm assuming we don't really see an income from in terms of the park and rides. And the majority will come, I'm guessing the majority of this 12 million income comes from city centre parking. And we're currently, work started on Avon Street car park, which seems a strange time to reduce the amount of parking in the centre just before Christmas, where that could have generated, again, more income. So again, where are we on strategy on this parking?
The problem the council has is there is an incoherence between wanting to have more and more cars and more parking and trying to take measures to reduce carbon production by motor vehicles. These two are fundamentally at odds with each other. They don't sit at all comfortably. And if in a perfect world, the council would not be reliant on car parking income. But it is a fact of life, and we saw it last weekend, that a lot of people will drive to come into the city, and even if many of them divert to the park and rides, which we hope they do because we don't want them to bring their cars into the centre of the city, nevertheless, a lot of people will still take the chance and they'll come into the centre of the city. And it's very difficult at a kind of high level to prevent that. The strategy is the highway strategy is to reduce the volume of vehicles coming into the city for health and climate reasons, if nothing else. But people, if Chris Major was here, Chris would say, well, there is a sensitivity to that. There is a point at which people will not pay if they think it's too expensive. And what's quite interesting, any of you walked around Royal Victoria Park on Saturday, what you'd have seen is car after car parked in the road in Victoria Park, because you can park 4 hours there. It's metered, but you can park there. And it was really, really busy. I've never seen it so busy on a Saturday. Normally it's just park users. So point I'm making is that people will seek out opportunities to park everywhere they can, and they'll go further and further out. They may use buses to come in, they may walk, but they'll go further and further out. So it is a bit of a dilemma for us. I'm not sure I know what the answer is, Councillor Hughes, but certainly in terms of the income, it's very important because of the reinvestment that goes back into transport schemes.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. I understand that obviously our aspirations are to reduce the amount of vehicles in the city, but I'm just more concerned with our very short-term situation where we're looking to find. We've got what is it, £19.4 million we've got to save, and we're looking at a combination between cost reduction and income generation. And at the moment, I'm not sure if most of that's going to come from cost reductions rather than, unless there's any good news on income generation.
There is no way that we can bridge our gap through raised income. Andy's referred to better prospects than we might have expected on the commercial estate. Bear in mind, though, that we only own a commercial estate in Bath. We own roughly a third of it in terms of trading properties. A further third is owned by St John's, and the other third is owned by other large landlords. So I think when people walk in Bath, they assume the council owns everything. Well, we don't. So the behaviour of other landlords who we do work closely with, does have a big influence as well. So I think it's it's not as easy as you might think to control all of these things.
Councillor Dogood.
Yeah, just on the reserves, you've got unencumbered reserves at 12.5 million, and I just wonder where we were on other reserves, and if there's any get out of jail card on smoothing reserves that might help the revenue account. I seem to remember the last time I looked at reserves, I think I asked this question back in 2019, and if I can remember the answer, we had about 42 million, and I think that number of unearmarked reserves was probably about 15 million then. I may be getting you, Andy, you'll know the figures off the top of your head. I just wonder where we were in the overall reserves and whether there's any possible help that we might get on revenue going into the new financial year out of those reserves?
Thanks, Councillor Dogood. You're absolutely right that the retained level of reserve the council holds is higher than the 12.5 million, which is the unearmarked reserve that we hold for budget risk. So that's for areas where we do our best to model risk in the budget around inflation, contract inflation specifically, but also demand rises, and that's the reserve that would be utilised in an over budget position where those risks can't be mitigated. However, the council does hold a higher level of reserve. Many of those are linked to specific things. We hold an insurance reserve. That's for future insurance claims, where lots of these go back to historic cases from years ago, but the council's deemed liable, so we settle those from that reserve. The level is around about 54 million. That's the latest figure. The reserves change every year. However, in terms of our budget in year, there'll be planned use against some of those reserves linked to financial planning and also specific pieces of investment. So some of those will go down, and also we hold a social care reserve that's now got significant planned use because social care costs are coming in a lot higher this year. So we need to be really careful we don't utilise the reserves as a funding source to balance future years' budgets. Temporary use of reserves is appropriate if you can replenish those reserves, and as part of the detailed work that's happening now, we are looking at a review of all of our reserve levels to make sure that we're happy that we've got appropriate levels where we've got lots of known commitments against those reserves in future years, because reserves have to span a range of financial years, not just the year ahead. So we need to ensure that there's a suitable level there. But also, in terms of that review, what I will be doing with Councillor Samuel and the Cabinet and Finance colleagues is looking at our general unearmarked reserve and testing that against some of the inflation risk in future years because it is so high. So that might be a reserve that needs to be looked at in terms of its level and upped.
And the auditors will have a view, presumably. I mean, benchmarking us against other unitary authorities on our side, they'll be looking at ratios. So you'll be slightly constrained, in a way, by what the auditors would say would be best practice on a ratio basis.
Absolutely. The financial health is tested by tools that the auditors put in place to look at ensuring that what we don't do is get into a level where council reserves are going into that sort of risk level where you can't meet future's demand, because I think, especially as part of our going concern status as a council, that we can demonstrate in terms of our reserve levels, we can fund future years' expenditure if things do happen in the budget where costs go up and income levels drop.
Okay, so Councillor Samuel, you've worked in the public sector market and been chief executive of a local authority. I mean, in your view, in your experience, is Baines fairly prudent in its level of reserves and that sort of thing? I mean, you read in the papers about Thurrock getting into £800 million worth of energy development, etc. Are we in Baines pretty prudent? Are we too prudent, or are we round about where you would expect a unitary authority like Baines to be?
I think Thurrock is a bit of an outlier. I can't remember the exact figure they borrowed, but I've got a feeling it's 860 million. And they haven't got the ability now to service the loans they took out for those investments. But I think going back to the issue about reserves, if your reserve levels are very low, you effectively have no in-year resilience. So that you just get blown away. There is, I can't remember which London borough it is, but I think it's one London borough that's operating on 5 million reserve. And that's nothing these days. That can be wiped out over months as we're seeing ourselves from increases in costs, contracts that come in millions above what had been expected. So I think if I've had any approach over the last few years, it has been to rebuild the level of reserves to a good level. And they had fallen by 10 million over the previous term. They have now risen by over 10 million. So we are in a stronger position. We're certainly in a stronger position than many councils. But I would absolutely not be prepared to go down the road that says, let's spend some of those reserves to, soften the pressures we've got next year. I subscribe very much to a view that you should either spend reserves, as Andy's described, on things that are absolutely unavoidable and you have to deal with, or the spending of reserves where that is linked to investment of some form. So I'm quite happy to see reserves spent if it leads to innovation that then ultimately brings costs down, for example. And we have an innovation reserve, I think, don't we? So I think that's just a philosophy of the way of doing things. But you've got to hang on to your reserves, because in the current environment, with very little help from anywhere, you have to really protect your own financial position. And the reserves have enabled us over the last 3 years to weather what's been pretty difficult 3 years.
So just to clarify that, during this administration, you've actually built the reserves from that which you inherited in the time of COVID and crisis and everything?
Yeah, they've gone up, yeah.
And that's total reserves, unencumbered and...
Yeah, that'll be the total reserve. I think the unearmarked reserve is roughly in the same quantum, isn't it? It's about the same quantum. So it's the other reserves that have been built up. So where we have had underspends, instead of spending them, we have saved them, and we've put them to one side in anticipation that we may have to use them, and we have had to use them. As Andy says, the social care reserve has been drawn on this year necessarily because of the pressures that those services are facing. So, I'm afraid that, it's a bit like any other management of any other budget. If you put money aside for a rainy day, and I think that's what we've done, and it's certainly raining at the moment.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Councillor Hodge, is it quite quick? Because
Yes.
I'm conscious of the time.
Sorry, I just wondered, the business rates retention pilot, what do you think the chances of that being extended and us getting the better placed position of 16 million savings?
Well, I think the council's hopeful it's continued, because obviously we retain a lot more of the business rates, but that detail wasn't in the Chancellor's budget announcement or any of the published documents. So I think we'll be needing to wait till the provisional settlement detail that will come in on the last weeks before we break up before Christmas.
I mean, there are changes afoot on business rates. I mean, within the Chancellor's statement, the revaluation of business rates is going ahead next year, and there are new transitional arrangements that have been announced to soften the blow for businesses who see their rates go up. And I think there's a small business relief scheme that is going in, which we will get compensated for, because obviously we won't get that income. So there are changes afoot, and Michael Gove announced this week a review of council tax and how that raised money for local government. To be honest with you, these things are well overdue. I've said this before, and the current setup whereby local services are funded by either council tax or business rates, or councils having to do all sorts of other things, this is not a sustainable way to run local government in Britain. We can't afford to run it like this, and nobody likes what councils are having to do every year, which is cut services and constantly scrimp at things. Nobody likes this. This is not a popular, we all get it in the neck for that, whoever's running the council. So I think we do need to, but I'm afraid neither of these reviews will come forward before the next general election. These things inevitably have a 2-year time window. They both need national legislation in Parliament. I don't see that happening before 25, to be honest. So it'll be an issue for the next government, whoever that is.
Okay. Thank you very much to Councillor Samuel and to Andy Rothery for that. That was fairly in-depth, I think. Now, can we move on to item 11, the panel work plan? So 23rd of January, we've got budget scrutiny, and I think we probably like to suggest we need the whole meeting for that, unless anybody wants to suggest something to go in with it. No? So shall we leave that one?
Yes, with all the good news that goes.
Yeah. So 30th of January, we've got the Somer Valley Enterprise Zone. And we were talking about Aqueous coming back in to update us probably on the business plan. Would that be a good place to put it? I mean, I'm hoping that on the 30th of January, I'm hoping that they will have that pretty much ironed out, because they will be fairly close to their only a couple of months away from their year end. Councillor Dogood.
I think you and I need to, if the committee is happy with that, give them a proper briefing as to what we're looking for in that meeting.
May I suggest that any panel members, if you'd like to send through any questions or any objectives that you have out of that particular meeting, that would be helpful. If you could do that by sort of mid-January, that would be great. We'll say the 10th. That's not mid-January, but let's say the 10th because that'll give us time to sit down with them and talk to them. Yeah? So if we could put that in for that date. Is anybody recommending that we put any other of our issues to discuss in there? Or we think that's going to be quite a meaty meeting? Councillor Hodge. Yes, I'll go through that when we looked at this. Okay. So on the 13th of March we don't have anything. Would the Invest in Bath and North East Somerset be an appropriate issue to discuss there? Either along with the economic strategy, or would you prefer to leave that to the new panel after May? Oh yeah, we do have that. Yeah, I'd like to understand what, because we did decide what we were going to leave some issues for the next panel because we felt it was appropriate that they started off on those. So things like I think the parish charter, we said that would probably be good for the next panel to look at. Does anybody, if nobody's desperately phased about any of them, we'll leave it to the agenda planning meeting then. Councillor Hughes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm quite interested in the economic strategy. Certainly, following on from the conversation we've had, where we're looking at this rebalancing of from being so dependent on tourism and hospitality and retail. So I'm quite interested in this strategy to reduce our dependency and what they're going to replace it with and how they're going to make that happen. So,
okay. All right. Well, so we'll look at that then in our agenda planning session. Okay. Is there anything else? So the only other item I'd like to just update you on is that Councillor Hodge, Councillor Hughes, myself, are meeting Cherry Bennett and also Amanda George, middle-aged moments, so sorry. Amanda George, to discuss some of the issues around the Civic Centre, retention, leavers, all those sorts of issues. If you've got any questions, that's on Thursday at 12 o'clock. If you've got any questions you want to field them to me, please do. Otherwise, we'll meet and we'll put a little report together and we'll disseminate that through, and then we can make a decision as to whether any of those items need to go back on our issues list for it'll probably be the next panel. Is that all right? Is everybody happy with that approach? So if you just let me have any questions that you have, just email them to me, and I can take those to the meeting. Thank you very much for your time, and I have to say Merry Christmas. Oh, in November, I nearly got away with it. Sorry about that. But I hope everybody has a lovely Christmas. Right, thank you very much indeed. Meeting is now closed.